Craig, you need to share. Craig is.
I'm not made a presenter, Pam.
Yeah, just take it. Sorry. Just realised as I was doing it. See, you are a print. There you go.
Okay, you see my slides?
Yep, all good to go.
Good evening and welcome to the first UK BIM Alliance East event of the year, which will focus on behaviours and collaboration within the built environment. I'm Craig Hardingham, Chair of the UK BIM Alliance East and your event chair for the evening. Sue Butcher from Just Practicing will be talking about collaborative working, eating the elephant. Dr. Jenny Barrett of CoLab will present her findings from a research project that analysed online versus offline collaborative relationships. Paul Wilkinson, representing Behaviours for Collaboration Group, talks about collaboration being something that is not achievable simply by applying technologies. Our final speaker for the evening is Tony Llewellyn from Resilex, who is sharing his thoughts on a model for building collaborative culture in large project teams. Any questions you have during the presentation, please use the question window to post them. We will have a Q&A session at the end to give you the chance for the presenters to answer them for you. To start, I'd like to run through a few updates from an Alliance perspective from the recent newsletter. The technology group is unique to the Alliance, bringing the software and hardware partners for digital construction together. As a group, they meet on a quarterly basis to share their latest industry trends and discuss and share their challenges. Building Smart is committed to the creation and adoption of open international standards and solutions for the digital transformation of the built asset industry. Currently re-energising the UK and Ireland chapter of Building Smart. A steering group formed of Casey Rutland, Emma Hooper, David Owens and Nick Nesbitt. There is a Building Smart UK and Ireland forum taking place on March the 31st, which is a virtual online event, details of which I will come on to later. The Fuelets Group aim is to connect with the various industry and trade associations to ensure there is a consistent approach to digital transformation. There are some changes within the communities. East region is being part of that. A new leadership team of 8 members to share effort of coordinating and aligning the resources available to the regions and the BIM Fours for organising or participating in events. Here are the events the Alliance have attended this year. I'd like to just remind you a bit about the Alliance. It's you. Our work is for the industry, by the industry. We are an umbrella organisation positioned to interact with all areas of industry, just as BIM touches on all disciplines, functions of asset delivery and operation. If you're interested in and working towards industry modernisation, then the Alliance is representing your interests. Anyone can get involved in a number of areas and ways. The Alliance is here to ensure the first fundamental step to digital transformation is for BIM to become business as usual. So how is the Alliance structured? At the centre, we have the Executive Committee. Linked to that, we have the groups responsible for delivery of various topics. Implementation deals with the various projects commissioned by the Alliance. Operations deals with the back of house and the running of the Alliance. We have the Building Smart UK and Ireland chapter. Engagement deal with the various community groups. The ambassadors, patrons, and technology group sit within this as well. The technology group is the software and hardware partners for digital construction. Then we have the non-executive directors, governance and strategic advisory group. Outside that, we have the various community groups, the BIM regions and the BIM 4s. Then there is the wider industry of the built environment. We are not funded by government, but we do have patrons. Funding from these patrons helps us to deliver a website, maintain operations, and produce some excellent reports for the industry, creating an end-of-year report to send out to all patrons as part of their patronage. 10 things you need to know about the UK BIM Alliance. It's you, the industry. With projects managed by the exec team. It's open, anyone can be part of it. It's funded by patrons and strategic partners to promote BIM as business as usual. There's a regional hub near you, East being one of them, or a BIM 4 group specific to you. Look out for our ambassadors and connect with others. Use or contribute to guidance we publish. So what is BIM? At its very simplest, BIM is a process of defining, creating and delivering structured data and documents for the lifecycle of built environment assets. You may have seen that the UK BIM Framework was launched at the Digital Construction Week last year. It's a collaborative effort brought to you by UK BIM Alliance, BSI and Centre for Digital Built Britain. It is the overarching approach to implementing BIM in the UK. There are no more BIM levels going forward. This is the benchmark for how to deliver BIM in the UK in accordance with ISO 19650. It is a 3-part initiative from BSI, CDBB and the UK BIM Alliance to develop an approach to digital transformation which allows us to understand and have control over the shift from analog to digital, to demonstrate semi-automated and then automated processes in a scalable way, to develop open, shareable standards which allow for checkable, repeatable, improvable processes. Here is an overview of the guidance available for the UK BIM Framework. It supports each standard within the ISO 19650 series. There are multiple additions to ensure industry feedback is taken on board. It's free via the UK BIM Framework website. Anyone can participate and/or feedback into the guidance using the email addresses on screen. Some important dates for your diary. The Building Smart UK and Ireland Forum on March 31st, which is a virtual online event. In the afternoon of that date, you have the first UK BIM Alliance Forum. We then have the Think BIM half-day conference on the 20th of May. For a list of all event details throughout the year, visit ukbimalliance.org News and Events page. Get involved. Volunteer today. There are several ways you can connect with the UK BIM Alliance, details of which you can see on your screen. Please get involved and help drive our industry forwards. Thank you. Just a reminder that any questions you have during the presentations, please use the question window to post them. We will have a Q&A session at the end to give you the presenters an opportunity to answer them for you. I will now pass over to Sue Butcher to start us off on the collaboration presentations.
Hello everybody. I hope you can see me. You should be able to see my webcam, and you might want to make the window a bit bigger because I'm going to do my presentation on this whiteboard here. So what am I going to be talking about? Well, My name is Sue Butcher. You can talk to me on Twitter using this hashtag, using this username, and you can also talk about what we're talking about today using this hashtag, PEH4COLL. And I've been doing a presentation like this about collaborative working for quite a long time because I was very interested in trying to help explain what working collaboratively really means in practical ways to our friends and colleagues in the industry. So what is collaborative working? Let's start with that. It's not just coordination. Coordination is about filling the gaps to make sure that there aren't any and we don't miss anything. It's not just cooperation. Cooperation is about sharing, and sharing is really important if we're going to do things more efficiently in our industry. But collaboration is more than that. Collaboration is about working together with shared values to produce better results. So if you actually genuinely collaborate together in the construction and built environment, then you should see better results, better efficiencies, reductions in waste, reductions in costs. And all of us who are involved in trying to promote BIM as a technique for doing this know that collaborative working is, in essence, a core part of BIM, and BIM requires us to work collaboratively together. But collaborative working has been around for a lot longer than that. It goes back, of course, to the Latham and Egan reports. Some time ago, I think it's at least 5 years ago, Constructing Excellence produced a definition of collaborative working, which has 6 key elements. So I'm going to start with that to explain what it is. So if you're working collaboratively in the construction industry, you have to do these 6 key things. Okay, so the first one is early involvement. Early involvement of everyone who's involved in the process and has an interest and can make a value contribution to the project that you're doing. Secondly, is selection by value. Whoops. Now, selection by value is really important because then we get best value, we don't get cheapest. Okay, and then Constructing Excellence says we need to have aligned commercial arrangements, which means, of course, that that everyone has to win in the process. So if you're involved in a project and you're not getting anything out of it, you're not going to collaborate. And then the fourth one is common processes and tools. So as Craig says, we need to do these things together. We need to have common tools and standards, and that allows us to eliminate waste. And then number 5 is measurement. We need to measure our performance, often by using KPIs. And the reason why we measure our performance is that we can make sure what we're doing, we do more of what's working, and we stop doing things that aren't working. And that's really important too. And then lastly, we have long-term relationships. And we create long-term relationships because then we can foster a culture of trust. And trust is absolutely essential in if we're going to make these cost and other benefits savings and so on. Now, if you do all these 6 things, Constructing Excellence said, well, you can reach your collaborative working nirvana. There we are. So it's easy, isn't it? We should all be doing this because obviously we can do it. But why aren't we working collaboratively? Because we know we're not. Well, let's start with early involvement. We don't do early involvement. We delay the involvement of everyone we possibly can. We delay the involvement of cost consultants. We delay the involvement of engineers. And we do this because we think it saves us money. Okay, and then we don't select by value. We select by price. And we select by price because we think it's cheaper. And of course, also, we try and move the prices all up front. So we try and get people to commit to prices really early before they know what's going on. So we want to select by price because that's the primary objective of our current processes. Now, the next one is, do we have aligned commercial arrangements? No, we have an adversarial approach. We have an adversarial approach, and that means it's not that everyone wins, but that I'm going to win. I'm going to win, and I'll probably be doing it at your expense. And most of our industry works that way. A lot of us make money out of other people's failings. Until we stop doing that, we're never going to work collaboratively together, and we're not going to get the benefits of that. Okay, so we're doing really well at the moment, aren't we? So what about common processes and tools? Well, we don't have those either. We have silos. Just look at our institutions. They're still siloed even now, 5 years on, from this suggestion. And then, of course, what about measurement? We all measure, don't we? We all measure. But we don't. We don't measure because we don't look at the data. And we don't look at the data because we don't want to see what we've done wrong. We don't want to learn from our mistakes. We don't want to admit that we've made mistakes. And then lastly, what about long-term relationships? Well, we don't do them either. We reinvent the wheel every time. So that's a bit of a disaster, isn't it? That's why we're not doing collaborative working, because we can't sort our way out of this little Gordian knot here. So if the idea of my presentation here is about how do you eat the elephant? How do we sort out this mess? Well, I want to look at it in 3 separate areas. Okay, and we'll start off with the solution that is most commonly used to say that we can sort out collaborative working, and it's the thing that most money has been invested in over the last 5 years or longer, and that is, can you guess what it is yet? It's technology. We spend so much money on technology to solve our collaborative problems. And I know, of course, now, and I don't know about you, but I've been very busy in the last week, we're really investing in new technology to encourage us to communicate better online because we can't communicate better in the normal ways. So what's technology about? Well, technology is important. And it's important because it helps us with sharing information. And we need to do that if we're going to work collaboratively together. So lots of examples of this, remote working, for example, which we've been talking about quite a lot over the last week. We've got talking about databases. And of course, common data environments, which you often hear talked about, but even things like email. They're all about technology first. And technology is important because technology allows us to make it easy, make working collaboratively easy, if possible at all. Sometimes we can't do it without technology, and that's fine. But there's a problem with this because technology is only 10% of the answer. I think Paul's presentation is probably going to elucidate on this a lot more, which is great. But it's only 10% of the answer. So we need another element. And the next element that people often talk about is this one. It's the legal and contractual arrangements. In order to stop some of the problems we've got over here, we've got to change our contractual arrangements. We've got to sort out our legal environment. And all of that is really about sharing risk. Because risk and the cascading of risk down through the supply chain is one of the major problems that we have in our construction industry at the moment. And we can use legal devices to change that culture. And of course, there are lots of ways that we can do this. So, for example, we can have defined roles. So we can have contractual arrangements that make sure we know who's doing what and whose job it is. We can also look at clarity in contracts, and we can make them shorter. As you know, if you know Sarah Fox, 500-word lawyer, she's very into every contract ought to be 500 words or less, and I'm really up for that as well. And what this is all about really, of course, is to make collaborative working required. It's the required element, and that's absolutely essential. But in fact, the legal stuff is probably only about 20% of the answer. Legal stuff is important, and if we don't change our legal environment, that's going to be brilliant, but it's not enough because we've got another 70% to sort out. And as you can probably imagine, given the title of this, the last one, the most important one, is behaviour. We need to change our behaviours. And that's at the absolute core. And only if we change our behaviours can we start building trust, which is absolutely key. And when you think about behaviours, and obviously everyone who's speaking today is going to be talking about this a lot, but I will mention a couple of things. We need to think about leadership. You're never going to be able to share and work in different ways if you don't have support from the top. Secondly, we need to think about openness. If I can write properly. We need to be open with each other. We need to be honest with each other. We need to build those new relationships. And of course, we need to think about new ways of working. And all of these are behavioural. But if we manage to do that, if we manage to change our behaviours, then we'll do the best thing ever. We will make it a habit. And once working collaboratively, once you get bitten by the working collaborative bug, you won't be able to stop doing it, and you won't be happy with the existing situation. Okay, so that's my breakdown of how to eat the elephant. There's our 70%. But I thought I'd just give you some examples so that you can start thinking about scenarios and challenges that you could deal with by breaking them down into these three elements: tech, legal and behaviour, and work out what do we need to do technically, what do we need to do legally, and what do we need to do behaviourally. So let me give you a couple of examples. I'm going to give you three. The first one is not construction. It's a web development project, which I was involved in a good few years ago now with a client, because I do a lot of web development and web commissioning. In fact, I commission websites, and I was helping them commission a website, and they wanted to use me, and they wanted to use people who weren't in an agency. That had some very bad experiences with some agencies, particularly the agent that built their original website. So what we did was we found a solution so that they could work with the people they wanted to work with, that they knew would give them the expertise they wanted. They could talk to them directly. But these people were all over the country. There were a couple of them in Milton Keynes. There was me in Essex. The client was in Northern Ireland. The copywriters were in North Yorkshire and France. So what we did was we had to find a technical solution, and the technical solution was distributed teams. So we had a team, we set it up, it was distributed, and then we used all sorts of tools like Slack and Zoom, well not Zoom, but Skype and Redpen and loads of other tools that allowed us to keep open channels of communication with each other. That made it easy for us to talk to each other. And then of course we had to deal with the contractuals, so we had defined roles. Everyone had their own contract with the client, and the client saved all the overheads of the agency, and they didn't have to pay for an account manager who didn't know anything about anything, and that worked really well. And then of course the most important thing, The important thing was the behavioural element. And we had a culture of open communication. Everyone involved in the project wanted to work together. They knew what each other was expert in. They knew who to ask about things. They trusted each other, and we talked to each other, and we had weekly meetups online and on Slack all the time, and it worked extremely well. And the output is a fantastic website, which the client is continually building on in their relationships, using some of the same people in the team, continuing on. So that's example one. Example two is a construction project. It's one you might have heard of, which is Dudley Advanced 2, which is a new school building in Dudley. And they decided that they wanted to use collaborative working on this. And we're going to break that down. So what did they do for technology? Well, they needed technology to eliminate snags, and they managed it. If you talk to the people who worked on the project, there were no snags when the contract ended. There were no snags at handover, and they did that with BIM. So BIM is the technological solution. And then, of course, what did they do legally? Well, they used integrated project insurance, which I know has been renamed to something else now, but that's what it was called at the time. And that was about sharing risks and sharing rewards, so that everybody who was involved in the project joined a joint venture company that took out all the insurance for the project, and therefore they all had a vested interest in its success, and they no longer felt that they needed to profit from other people's failure. And lastly, they created a culture of openness again. And the thing about this is they selected people for this project. They selected teams, consultants and contractors that they knew already had a culture of openness in order to get around the behavioural issue. And they didn't select by price. They interviewed, and they knew who they were going to use, the actual individuals, and that made it possible for them to get around the behavioural problem. And our last example, it's a little humorous one, partly related to working from home and being at home, which I know we're all having interesting times doing at the moment. And it is this: I've got a teenage son, and I want him to do the washing up. God, I can't get him to do the washing up. I can try everything. Okay, so the best solution to get your son to do the washing up is a tech solution. You get a dishwasher. Now, if you have a dishwasher, we can make it, a bit more interesting, a bit less work. It makes it easier. That's all fine. But having a dishwasher doesn't work in itself. And then we can try the legal side, okay, which is, of course, when it comes to parenting, it's carrot and stick. Rewards and rewards and retribution. Okay, so if you do the washing up, you get an extra hour on the computer, and if you don't do the washing up, you don't get that new computer game you wanted. Well, that's fine, but that doesn't work either. What we need to do is to encourage a behavioural change, and the behavioural change has to make washing up more than just a job. And how we did that is we took the cultural environment we already had that was working, which was sitting around the dinner table, talking to each other about things and having fun, and we just move it into the washing up stage. So you can take that collaborative thing into the washing up stage, and we all do the washing up together. So you take steps towards working together and do the washing up together, and then it becomes more enjoyable. And you get your washing up done. So there's my presentation. There's something I want to end with, but I did want to say that I have made a board on Pinterest with loads of resources in collaboration. It's at bit.ly/P Pinterest. big C, big W for collaborative working. And you're welcome to go there and see the links. And if you want to use the hashtag on Twitter to share with us some other resources, I'll be adding other things from these presentations tonight. I hope it will be useful and we can share useful information together. So to finally end with something that I came across yesterday, which was about it was a chap on Facebook actually who shared an article about an open source ventilator project to build ventilators and design them using open source. And something he said in his post about this, which was, let it sink in that they're not doing it for profit. Let it sink in that people are motivated by things other than money to do great work. Let it sink in that there are other ways we can organise and interact with each other. Let it sink in that as hard as things are right now, there is opportunity here to change and do better. Okay, so I'm now going to hand you over to Jenny, who's going to tell us about her fantastic research.
Thank you, Sue. Thank you. I'll just bring up my slides and get those up. There we go. There we go. So hopefully you can both hear me and see my slides. I'll be talking about some research that I've done, but also it does echo and kind of build on what Sue's been saying, which is really relevant. And I think a lot of this is so relevant right now, as well as we're all kind of trying to maintain those collaborative relationships online, working from home, and kind of in this sort of atomized way that we are at the moment. My name's Jenny Barrett and I'm Director of CoLab, which does research projects and also uses that research to develop training packages specifically for the construction industry. And I'd like to tell you about one of my projects recently. I did this project way before coronavirus was even a thing, but now I'm finding that it's absolutely relevant to how we're thinking about working at the moment. So my background generally is, for the background for this research as well, is as from a psychological perspective. So looking at the social aspects of collaboration. And when I was in practice, when I was working in the construction industry, this is what a design team collaboration would look like. Typically sitting around the table with either the drawing on the screen there or on the table, and everybody kind of talking, sometimes talking over each other, somebody kind of chairing the meeting, etc. That's changed. I like to think that the gender balance in this photo has also changed. That's changed because collaboration might look more like this now. It's about data sharing, it's about data management, it's about information exchange, and the social aspects tend to happen on things like Microsoft Teams. You might use Slack. There's obviously many packages that you use that on. And that changes the game. That changes the game of collaboration. The reason is because there's one, time, and two, visual. Digital collaboration is typically asynchronous. That means that when we collaborate, one person does one thing, another person does another thing. It doesn't happen necessarily at the same time. And even if it does, it is displayed in a linear fashion. So you follow it through. Quite often, those visual cues, which are our social cues, are completely absent. So when I say something, I can't, as I'm doing now, I can't see the audience today. I can't gauge whether they are feeling positive about what I'm saying and in agreement, or whether actually they're taking it all with a pinch of salt. I have absolutely no idea. And when we've done research with construction teams, we've asked them, do you prefer the asynchronous digital environment or the synchronous face-to-face environment? Unsurprisingly, they've said that they prefer that synchronous interaction, but our industry is digitalizing. So how do we manage that transfer? Because what we find is that in synchronous face-to-face interaction, that's a really great place for the social elements of design and project management to take place. Those things, like as Sue said, absolutely rightly, we develop trust. Trust is a visual thing as well as an emotional thing, as well as an action. We need to see somebody to build trust. Creativity, ideation, the way that we kind of, as I'm sure you've sat next to somebody designing or developing ideas and being creative about a project, and you get a buzz from that kind of synchronous backwards and forwards trial and error experimentation. You don't get that necessarily in the digital online environment. And those sharing of values as well, how we feel about a project, how we envision this project to go, what are the strategic ideas. How do we value things like sustainability? How do we value things like success? How do we perceive success? All those things we do in a social situation, because we are social animals. So, given all that, I wanted to try and understand collaboration. I was hearing a lot of people talking about collaboration in the context of trust, in the context of sharing and developing teamwork, and I needed more better definitions of that. I needed to understand exactly how that works. So I took 3 project teams, 3 case studies. Each team was working on projects using BIM as a tool. They're also using other interaction methods such as conference calls and online forums like Slack, Microsoft Teams. And I observed them, which was fascinating, during our IBA stages 0 to 4, which roughly covers the design phase of the projects that they were working on. And the way I did this is I wanted to learn about social exchange. So not necessarily information exchange. So not necessarily, I didn't want to I wasn't really interested in who sent which spreadsheet to who and who sent which drawing to who. That's less important. What I was interested in was in that true collaboration, that social interaction, how trust was being developed, how creative alliances were being developed. So I completely nicked a psychological concept and analysed affect, which is basically an affect psychologists would describe as those social cues that generate our team dynamics. They can be verbal, what we say, they can be gestural, that's a body language, or other expressive means, often just grunts of approval perhaps. And that's the way that people accept and convey how they're feeling about ideas, whether they want to accept, support or dismiss ideas and values amongst the group. So what I did is analyse the direction and frequency of that affect communication between individuals. So I was looking at how people were using their social cues and their social dynamics to actually develop those team relationships in a way that they could then start to develop trust, how trust was actually being developed. And I used a method called social network analysis, which is used a lot in social sciences. It has been used in construction to look at supply chains, which was fascinating. But I was looking at in-group social networks. What can we map how a team works? Can we visualize? We're all looking at in construction, we're very used to looking at drawings of maps of concepts and ideas, things that we want to communicate. We're very skilled in doing that. So could we then map how we construct our teams and how we construct collaborative relationships? Oops. There we go. And there we are. So here are the maps. Essentially, it's a mathematical tool. Essentially, what I did was look at as I said, the frequency and direction between nodes. Each node is a person in that team. And I looked at them across the 3 different media that they were using. And that what we noticed was really quite striking. In every single case, the conference call proved itself to be an absolutely rubbish way of developing your team and managing the social aspects of communication. If you want to develop a collaborative team and really strong collaborative relationships where collaborative behaviour becomes the norm, then please don't use conference calls. Conference calls were primarily for information exchange. So you can see there in that middle column, compare that map to the outside column. What you're looking at there is M1, which is one of the people in that group, literally just drawing in and having interaction with really a very small number of people in that team. What I should say about these maps as well is that those central within them were actually central to and kind of more integral within that team. So M1 is absolutely, you know, the linchpin, almost holding court with the rest of the team there. But conference call, it's really not showing good collaborative relationships. Compare that to the face-to-face map on the right there. You can see that M1 again, clearly the chair, the leader of this group, and there's a massive network of interrelationships going on there. But M1 and M3, clearly the project leaders with people around the edge kind of feeding in. And similarly, if we go to online, we can see that actually there's no real clear leader. E2 is coming in. M1 has kind of gone right out to the side. And that's what we saw in each case. We saw that conference calls really not helpful in developing collaborative relationships. Face-to-face was good. It had it tended to have chairs of the group. It was much more hierarchical, much more people struggled to kind of, you know, maybe take control of the design and creative process in that group. And actually a very democratic process going on and creative process actually going on in the online environment. And if we look down the bottom, I won't bore you with the figures, but if we look down the bottom, what we also saw that's reflected into the discipline of who's in charge here. So if you look at the face-to-face meeting, in every case, in each of the three teams, it was the management financial people that were in charge at central, right in the middle of that group. So these are your QSs, your legal guys, your contract guys. And actually in the online environment, the engineers tended to take control. These are the guys fixing it, making it happen. And these guys are at the kind of, so if you look on the face-to-face, you've got strategic people at a strategic level in their organization. We're talking project directors, etc. And in the online environment, the people that were most prominent, most engaged in that collaborative relationship were at the technical level. You know, maybe not even, you know, pre-chartership, just post-chartership. You know, the people, the doers, essentially. So if my computer seems to have slowed down a little to change. There we go, and we can see it in each streak. So moving on to the next team again, conference call, absolutely rubbish. A kind of networked environment in the face-to-face meeting, again with management, financial disciplines, holding court in the center of that team with other people feeding in. And the online a little bit different. E1 is kind of, you know, a very strong player here, but actually there's a lot of crisscrossing. And we also see that discipline alliance, one thing I predicted and I was wrong, was that disciplines would form alliances with each other. Architects would stick with architects, engineers would stick with engineers. And actually what we found is a very nice little interdisciplinary alliances forming. And this was particularly the case in the online environment. So if you want your project team to get some real interdisciplinary synthesis going on in the design process and the thinking process, then I would recommend that those people meet in the online environment. I think the project team meeting face-to-face is not the place to make that happen. Third team, a very busy team, as you can see, a lot more lines going on. And again, a similar pattern. Conference call, not too bad here, but the online environment, incredibly productive, lots of networks, very democratic space, and again, a very hierarchical environment in that face-to-face meeting. Now, I wasn't looking for this, but when I was kind of, what interested me in all of those maps was, yes, who is holding court? Who is in charge here? How is the structure working? Is it a tall hierarchical structure, or is it a flat creative structure in these different environments? But also I saw these kind of people kind of scattered out at the edges, and I wondered who those were. Now, in some cases, those people were simply people who had taken part in the project for one day and then kind of just left, and we never saw them again for lots of various reasons. But some of them were actually people who were consistently present in the online and offline meetings. So why were they so peripheral to this environment? What was different about them that made them become part of these kind of satellites that you can see floating around the central core and the central hub of interaction. And so I kind of started to look at the data, started to kind of see what commonalities they shared, and I found two surprising things. And I really didn't, maybe one I expected if we think of that first slide, but the second I didn't. And the one that really surprised me was creative thinkers. Now, when we talk about creative thinkers, they were people I'd observed in the video footage that I'd got of these teams, that these were the people that tended to think more divergently, really open ideas out, kind of go a bit left field on things when you're in the problem solving situation. Quite often they were the architects, so that, they're kind of trained to think in that way, and that's great. And then really analysing that, what I understood was that the creative thinkers were kind of excluded, not because there was any derision about those skills, but because the way and I think, we might come on to this later, but the way that we manage our big online digital projects is that we have to split up into smaller groups just to kind of be able to hear each other. So quite frequently, BIM teams were separate because BIM is complex. We were separating things out to allow a project BIM management team and the design team. So design was being consistently separated out from what was termed the project. And I think that's quite a dangerous thing, because what we're doing in doing that is, and we can actually see through the data, is actually the creativity, the spark, the flair, the great problem solving skills are maybe kind of falling out of our construction collaborative relationships. And then it probably won't surprise many people to note that many of those who were excluded were women. And we kind of predicted that, but it's actually quite horrifying to actually see the data play that out, and actually to be able to highlight, flipping out, this is actually happening. This isn't just negative experiences colouring what's going on. We can actually count how this is happening, and that's really a call for action. And you'll probably see in the bottom left of my slides the Women in BIM logo, and I think that finding alone is what motivated me to join the core team of Women in BIM, in order to A, find out more about what was going on here, and B, to see how we can affect change and action some of that. So ultimately, again, I'm not going to bore you with the figures, but this social network analysis allowed us to say, okay, we can use this to measure team cohesiveness, how tight this team is, how collaborative, are they actually collaborating, or does it just look, does all these emails flying around and all this flurry on Slack, does it just look like they're collaborating? And this social network analysis I can use to kind of say, actually, yeah, there's good collaboration. I can use it to descriptively to describe how collaboration works, to see if that's actually what you're expecting and what you want to happen, and if that's what's good for the project. So we find that that cohesiveness across the three teams was broadly comparable. And again, the numbers played out that if you measure that across the media types, that we find that conference call is the worst for developing cohesiveness. And it's that cohesiveness that builds trust. It's that tightness of a team that actually enables us, we're all human beings, that enables us to start to open up and begin to trust our colleagues. If you don't have cohesiveness, you don't have trust. And online and face-to-face were similar in that, except that when we look at it qualitatively, when we drill down and see what, as you saw in the maps, there are different things kind of going on. So it really starts to help us develop knowledge about how all these collaborative behaviours can actually be developed, and how we can tune our teams almost to encourage it. Again, this is just looking, you can see how in a face-to-face environment the strategic roles really dominate, and how in the online environments it's much more of a technical event. So we can look at how, so this is the kind of stuff that's being discussed in face-to-face meetings. Collaborations, they're still so important. If you're not sure, of course you have no choice right now, but when all this madness has gone and you're not sure whether to spend the money to get everybody together from various parts of the UK to a face-to-face meeting, or whether to just knock it out online. This will help you decide. A face-to-face meeting is absolutely valid and valuable if you are in a kind of project direction, strategic kind of, and that's your intention. So if you want to kind of really set the goals, the vision, the values of your project team to develop relationships, meet face-to-face. If you want to kind of share vision and get everybody on the same page, face-to-face. If it's about contextual knowledge and how your project sits in the wider scheme of things, face-to-face. If you're not intending to actively design and actively solve detailed problems, then yes, face-to-face is absolutely great. Meet online though, do not meet face-to-face. Set something up online if you want to problem solve at that detail level. If you want specific task-related knowledge sharing, task-focused work, real-time amendment and detailed adjustment of collaborative work, and you want to kind of experiment at that very detail level to fulfill those values that you set at the face-to-face meeting. Sue mentioned leadership as well, and I think as well it's a kind, if you're a project leader and you want to think about how you want to exert that leadership and how you want to lead, again, think about that technical strategic difference between the online and the face-to-face environments. If you want to kind of exert a much stronger leadership, then yes, face-to-face. If you're happy just to kind of facilitate and take a non-directive role, then I would say an online environment would suffice. And again, it's that and one thing that comes, I hear quite a lot from people in industry is that, particularly from leaders, is that they are concerned that the junior members of the team don't speak enough and don't come forward. If that is, with their ideas, and yet they hold the kind of creativity and the new knowledge that they bring to the industry. If that is a problem that you're experiencing, then I would encourage a democratic space to be created online. And that's kind of just a summary of what we've been describing. So 3 takeaways. Social network analysis, brilliant tool for investigating how your team is collaborating generally and across media, and whether that fits within your organizational goals. And by all means, do contact me. I'd love to compile an even bigger picture of the industry and look at how you think your team's collaborating actually matches up with the reality. Social network analysis is also useful for identifying who's excluded from your project team, so that you can your inclusion policies can be developed based on real facts about who and why exclusion happens in your organization or your teams. And just to say that it's really important to have this consciousness about selecting appropriate media. Like I say, we don't really get a choice now, but whilst you're at home, working from home, working in this online environment, which is speeding up digitalization of the industry, think about what it is you're missing in your project. Think about the fact that vision sharing, that value sharing, that strategic aspect might start to kind of lack a little, and we need to kind of find ways whilst we're working at home in this online way to maintain that. I also mentioned, this is a shameless plug, I also mentioned that women were one of the excluded groups within the teams that I observed, and that encouraged me to join Women in BIM, who do a fantastic job. And Women in BIM, you may have heard, have launched a mentoring scheme. So if you would like to be a mentor, or you would like to receive mentoring about to help you succeed in your BIM career, then you have until the 1st of April to get your application in for either of those categories. And the link's just down there, and obviously the slides will be available afterwards, or just go to the Women in BIM website and you can have a look at it there. So thank you very much. Thank you for listening. And I think I'm going to pass on to the fantastic Paul Wilkinson. Paul, you all right?
Yes, I am. Thank you. Right, let me just get my slides up on screen. Hopefully you can all see those. I am EE Paul on Twitter if you are tweeting at all about this, and the hashtag for this evening is hashtag BEH4COLL. That's Behaviours for Collaboration, which sort of chimes a little bit with the body or the organisations with which I've been involved. For those who don't know me, since 2009, I've been an independent technology consultant. I've been a blogger for a lot longer than that, writing about technology and collaboration in particular, and cloud technologies are my speciality. I am a member of the executive team of the UK BIM Alliance. I'm a BIM ambassador, and I'm chair of the technology group, though I'm speaking here obviously purely in a personal capacity and very much not talking about technology this evening. My other roles in the industry have taken me strangely into the Institution of Civil Engineers, where for a non-engineer, I feel quite honoured to be deputy chair of their digital transformation panel. I'm also active in other groups, including Comet, Constructing Excellence, and Think BIM. And the Behaviours for Collaboration group I'll touch on towards the end of my talk this evening. So I think my starting point really is to start to look at how the industry has tried to change, tried to become a bit more collaborative over the almost 90 years. If we go back to Albert Bossum in 1934, he was documenting how poor the industry was at collaborating and sharing information, how inefficient and wasteful it was. And what you have on the screen at the moment is purely a selective list of some of the many documents that have been published over the decades. And I'm going to pick out the ones in yellow and talk a little bit more about some of those, and then move on from those and illustrate that these are some of the government drivers for pushing new ways of working, new ways of thinking, and hopefully being more collaborative. So Sir Michael Latham, I started in the industry in 1987. 7 years in, I'd seen the industry at first hand working in a very adversarial way. I was very familiar with its wasteful approaches and the disputes that often arose. And Latham was pushing new procurement and contractual arrangements. And one of the strong initiatives that emerged from this was pushing partnering, building on concepts of teamwork that had been developed in other industry sectors. There was the cost reduction initiative for the new era, CRINE in the North Sea. Manufacturing was looking at achieving competitiveness through innovation and value engineering, a project called Active. And there was obviously the lean thinking approach that was coming out of Toyota and other places. And Michael Latham's initiatives spawned things like Construction Industry Board, which eventually became Constructing Excellence. And there were a number of documents that came out during the mid-90s. But the industry still didn't make major steps forward. So in 1998, we had another industry report, the Egan report, and this picked out some of the critical success factors that Sue mentioned earlier, the early involvement, selection by value, and so on. Obviously, Sir John Egan came from a manufacturing background. He worked in the automotive industry, he'd also worked in aerospace. So his approach was very much predicated on what he saw as a client of engineering and design organizations. And I think that there's a very good quote here from the early part of his document, which almost presupposes that we were going to be moving into a BIM world, maybe 20, possibly more than 20 years later now. Integrate the process and team around the product. He's picked out in this quote, in particular, at the top of the top paragraph, the most successful enterprises do not fragment their operations. They also work back from the customer. So this is, if we were thinking about BIM, this is the opportunity where we're talking with the what we used to describe as employers' information requirements, but also there's a mention here of value, the value it delivers to the customer. This is very much focusing on being a bit lean in the process. The other thing I would pick out from this particular quote is the final sentence about changing culture being fundamental to increasing efficiency and quality in construction. This culture point is reiterated time and time again in the various reports that have come out of government and which have guided the work of organisations like Constructing Excellence. They very clearly have in the context of, for example, Andrew Wolstenholme, when he wrote a report in 2008 called Never Waste a Good Crisis at the height of the global financial crisis. You know, it's perhaps alarming that we didn't take heed of what he said then. We're facing an even deeper crisis now and may need to respond to some of these points as we emerge from the coronavirus pandemic over the next months and years. But the Constructing Excellence view was very much that as an industry, we needed to have a common vision, that project teams to successfully apply collaborative working needed a common vision and leadership. And I know that's a phrase that both Sue and Jenny have picked up. Also need to think about the culture and behaviours, but also the processes and the tools. And it was also, hence the little triangle at the bottom, about ensuring a balance, not pushing too much on the culture and behaviours, not pushing too much on the processes and tools. But you know, this was the key steps for moving forward in driving collaborative working on project teams. Roll forward a few years, and you know, in 2015. Digital Built Britain was published. You know, I'm not going to dwell on all of the BIM developments in the meantime, but the interesting thing for me here is that Digital Built Britain, whilst it has digital in the title, is very clear that actions were needed to address delivery mechanisms. We needed to address commercial concerns, some technical issues. And that's not just technical in the sense of the technologies we use in delivering projects, but also the technologies used for fabricating and working on site. So, you know, we're getting into a world now where we're talking about off-site manufacturing, for example. So it was those technical issues as well, but also picking up very strongly cultural points. So the behavioural issues come out of this, and also building an industry which is investing in research and innovation, something which historically it has been very poor at doing. And Mark Bew, when he launched the Digital Built Britain document in 2015, described this as a 10-year programme. We were working towards targets set by a document 2 years earlier called Construction 2025. And to a large extent, those targets have continued to apply to the industry right through to the current time. One of the great things about Digital Built Britain, that document for me, was this diagram. You know, it wanted a major shift in how we deliver our projects and how we work as businesses. You know, it brought together not just construction, but it brought together professional services. It brought together the digital economy. This was a digital plan spanning much more than just the built environment, and it was encouraging us to think of new ways of doing things, new ways of thinking, setting up new business relationships, but also building into this new performance metrics on the basis that what gets measured gets managed. And you can see on the right-hand side some of the tools, technologies, approaches, ideas and issues that were informing the thinking behind Digital Build Britain, certainly way more than just a focus on BIM and sensors and 3D printing. Lots of information here about inclusion and diversity. So picking up on some of the points that Jenny's already made about women in BIM, for example. Just over 3 years ago, in October 2016, the Farmer Review of the UK construction labour model was published. It paints a bleak picture of a dysfunctional industry characterised by, among other things, you can see the symptoms on the screen, low productivity, structural fragmentation, the lack of a collaborative and improvement culture, and technology, though, is barely mentioned except in the context of investment in R&D and innovation. And I think it is noticeable that the structural fragmentation and the lack of a collaborative and improvement culture were both the points that were raised by John Egan some 18 years earlier, showing sadly little has changed in almost a generation in the UK construction industry. Mark Farmer also picks out the industry opportunities that come from using BIM to improve our ways of working, and underlines that BIM is very much predicated on collaboration, and that to make it work we have to start breaking down some of the traditional design and construction barriers, and also remove or break up the culture of data silos that exist both within the industry and also, sadly, from a technologist's point of view, between some of the technologies that we use. There is still sometimes a tendency for us to use just the tools which are peculiar to our particular bit of the profession and not think about the interoperability, the ability to exchange data between the different tools and platforms, but also to make sure that that data remains intelligible and accessible to the owners and operators who are going to be managing the built environment assets for decades to come. Following on from Mark Farmer's report, roughly a year later, the industrial strategy began to re-emphasize again the Egan point about value, and made an explicit call for the focus on value to shift away from being focused on just the initial capital cost, lowest price. I know Sue talked about that earlier, but thinking about ensuring construction projects are procured and built based on their whole life value. And this was a theme that was also picked up by the Construction Leadership Council, who talked about procuring on the basis of whole life value and performance, and measuring and rewarding good asset and supplier performance. The construction sector deal followed some months later, and picks up on the themes that Farmer had, stressing actions needed to improve how we procure projects, better and fairer commercial practices, and a focus on asset performance. And the strategic areas focused on in the construction sector deal include digital technologies, off-site manufacturing, and that whole life performance piece again. And this digital drive was well and truly pushed through in late 2017. We saw mentions of BIM in the autumn budget, the industrial strategy I've already talked about, but we also had documents coming out from the Infrastructure and Projects Authority and from the National Infrastructure Commission. We're talking much more now about design for manufacture and assembly, and also the creation and use of data to drive performance improvement across the industry. Sue said I would probably talk about people, process and technology. She is absolutely right. It is not just about digitization. McKinsey have done a number of reports looking at how the industry needs to change, and they're very clear that action in 7 areas is needed to boost sector productivity. So if you look at there's a diagram on the right, that orange band is the gap by which construction lags, and bridging that gap involves action across a range of areas, some of which are external to the industry, some of which exist within the industry, part of the dynamics of how firms interact with each other, but many of them at the firm level, they're operational factors. Yes, technology is the biggest area, delivering a big improvement, but it's only a small amount of the cost savings. Other areas such as collaboration, procurement and design are very clearly important to making that major step change. We can't do it just by throwing technology at the challenge. So it's been about procurement for most of the past 20 or 30 years. Latham talked about project partnering, strategic partnering approaches emerged during that time, and I'll talk about alliancing a bit more in a moment. We've had prime contracting and the building down barriers projects around the turn of the century, and the Cabinet Office in recent times has also been pushing new models of procurement, 2-stage open book, cost-led procurement, and the integrated project insurance approach that Sue talked about, or insurance-backed alliancing, as it's increasingly being talked about. I'll talk about alliancing for a moment because it's very clear that alliancing on many complex projects delivers significantly better outcomes than more traditional contractual arrangements. This was a quote from a report from the Infrastructure Client Group, managed through the Institution of Civil Engineers. And their best practice guide, their model for the approach, puts behaviours as a key element of the 4 items that are needed to have in balance to deliver a successful alliance. And their reports are available from the Institution of Civil Engineers website, and you can sort of see a summary of key enabling activities. I'm not going to dwell on all of them, but you can see activities, the alliance characteristics of good behaviours at strategy development stage, at procurement stage, during delivery, and during the commission and review stages. So picking up on some of the points I think that Sue and Jenny have made as well, and you know, this is part of an effort by the institution to bring about major change in how our infrastructure is delivered on behalf of the government. But you know, their report's very clear that behaviours are key. To ensure success, we have to look at the behavioural aspects of both the organisations and the individuals. So not just looking at contracts, but also people's behaviours. And we need to think about how those commercial models we deploy reward the delivery of agreed outcomes and drive the required behaviours, both at a company level and perhaps at the individual level. You know, it would be great if whole teams were rewarded, not just individuals in some cases. You know, the bonus payments sometimes are a source of resentment when they reward an individual and other people feel that perhaps they also contributed to the success of their team as well, but didn't get the bonus. Good examples of alliancing might include, for example, and you know, this is relevant to the Eastern region, the @ONE Alliance that's been working for Anglian Water, and they were able to deliver a major project in Cambridge at less cost, lower carbon, and more quickly than a traditional project might have been achieved. And this, you know, is the kind of approach which is being driven through many of the major water companies, and also beginning to affect how other major clients are procuring their projects as well, notably organisations like Heathrow, but I believe the Highways Agency is also moving into this kind of way of thinking. Interestingly, the @ONE Alliance and Heathrow Airport were clients of a London-based consultancy called Constructive Collaboration. They developed a model for what successful collaborative working looked like, and similar to the infrastructure clients group, they have a significant segment on behaviours as part of their model. They look at how teams come together and collectively assess their achievements during the delivery of a project. So in a number of sessions, they can score their project achievement, and they look to move them from maybe in early stages where collaboration is weak through processes of the agreed actions, and the delivery of those actions will hopefully improve the score of the project team as they move forward. So you can see that in that diagram bottom right. I provided some consultancy on this project, which and the outline of the early stages of research were presented at the Royal Academy of Engineering in London just about 15 months ago. So interesting project that some of you might like to follow up on. Both Heathrow and the @ONE Alliance were involved with the Infrastructure Clients Group and are now still involved with the Project 13 framework approach, which is being delivered again through the Institution of Civil Engineers. As the we're trying now to think about, again, Egan type thinking, delivering an industry-led response that meets the needs of operators and users of our infrastructure systems and networks, and also supporting some the whole life outcomes in terms of operation and of our infrastructure. Insurance-backed alliancing was something that Sue talked about. Kevin Thomas and his colleagues on this project, on this initiative, supported the @ONE Alliance, and you can sort of see here a brief description of how a single package of insurance products were put together to support that project at Dudley, and follow-on schemes are currently being procured. The Dudley Advanced 2 project targeted cost savings of around 15 to 20%, and they worked on a pain and gain sharing basis backed by the insurance model, but they're also investing quite hard in technology, both in terms of using BIM, but also thinking about things like off-site manufacturing, new methods of construction, and ways to eliminate waste in materials, processes and procedures. So thinking very much about lean. And they were also tasked by the client in producing a facility that was going to be flexible to meet future needs. So also beginning to address the ideas of a platform approach to design and construction of a facility. And a side project of the Advanced 2 project was the improvement and updating of a toolkit on integrated collaborative working that had previously been produced about 2005 for the Strategic Forum for Construction. That is available. This is still available today at icwtoolkit.com. So let's just ponder then on what the collaborative endeavours were all about. I think it was about shifting thinking away from just doing the normal things about communicating. So this is a bit of a continuum, an improvement as you go down the process. You want to get to a stage where you're also better at coordinating, you're cooperating better, and ultimately collaborating. some of those other steps are perhaps contractually required, but the nirvana, to use Sue's words, is about achieving results which could not be accomplished alone. That, for me, is what epitomizes successful collaboration. And this is about also demonstrating competencies. I was involved with a research project and a bid for Innovate UK funding on a project called Co-Competence, and we talked about combining knowledge, skills, and behaviours to create competence. So knowledge was the information you have about a subject. Skills are your ability to use what you know in a situation. And the behaviours are the ways in which you use the skills. That's what you see me do. If you are then co-competent, you're able to use information about a subject in a collaborative way. You can use your collaborative skills in a particular situation. And you are also demonstrably seen to be using your collaborative skills. So it's not just working in a small team. What others see you do inside your immediate working environment or on a single project, but that collaborative endeavour needs to extend across your work in tasks, in teams, in supply chain clusters, within your company, whether it's working in projects or in alliances. These are all part of where collaboration needs to be demonstrated. Behaviours for Collaboration was a joint industry academic group. University of West of England was at the heart of it. Elizabeth Kavanagh, then at Stride Treglown in Bristol, helped lead it. It became a BIM4 group, recognising that we needed more than just a focus on technology. We needed to be thinking about culture and behaviours. And because of my involvement with Constructing Excellence and its collaborative working champions and my digital thinking, it was a natural place for me to get involved. The aim of that project was to enable teams to be more collaborative by specifying the kind of behaviours to support collaboration. And one of the ambitions was to develop a profession map focused on collaborative behaviours. And this is one for HR. And the ambition for Behaviours for Collaboration was to produce something similar for this that would describe the attributes of a successful collaborator, such that you could then mould your continuous professional development to build the skills that you needed to support your collaborative projects, to support your collaborative teams, to be a successful collaborative leader. That just about concludes what I'm going to be talking about, but I'll leave you with a quote from Sir Michael Latham, where my presentation started. He's absolutely clear that failure to understand and adapt human behaviour is the biggest impediment to collaborative working. Thank you very much. I will now hand over to Tony Llewellyn of Resolex to pick up the strand.
Okay, Paul, that's great. Thank you. All right, just let me adapt. So hopefully my screen is now visible. So I'm going to talk, I suppose actually it's very interesting listening to the other speakers and pull a number of their different points into some research work that I've been doing. Perhaps just to give some...
Tony, sorry,
yeah.
Just to interrupt slightly, your slides are not in presenter mode, so you might want to make them in presenter mode.
There we go.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Perfect.
Okay. So just to give some context, I have spent 35 years in the construction industry, but for the last 7 years, I've been focused very much on team dynamics, particularly in construction teams. So I spend my time partly as a consultant, but I'm also a lecturer, researcher, and I also write on the subject quite a bit as well. So it's as much a hobby as it is as a career. What I'm going to talk about tonight is what where I've arrived at, having spent time looking at behaviours, the dynamics of how people behave in groups, and how construction projects, particularly complex construction projects, work when they work badly and when they work well. So when we think about collaboration, you can imagine you are about to embark on a new project. Could be a design project, could be in the construction phase, could be part of a construction phase, and you meet with your colleagues and you say, what do we want? And so we want, well, okay, we want collaboration. We want people to work effectively together, not just as individuals within teams, but also at the interfaces between teams. And we need to share information openly and honestly, so we need to build trust with each other. And we want to get to a place where we're solving problems on the fly and we're not escalating problems and slowing everything down and increasing costs. And we're going to want to get to a place where everybody has a best for project mindset rather than just simply being concerned with their own interests. So that, you know, I could sit with any group of project managers, project leaders at the start of a project and draw that sort of information out of them, because let's face it, who wouldn't want those circumstances? Of course, what we typically get then is something quite different, where we have, I'm just going to drop down the menu. So what we have is low levels of trust, because time is not invested in building the relationships. When things start to go wrong, which is normally between 4 and 8 weeks into a project, a blame culture immediately starts to emerge, and then the project continues either under the threat of or in actual dispute. Now, this is not just a UK phenomenon. It isn't that the construction industry in the UK is different to anywhere else. When I look at research papers done into construction collaboration, I see them coming from universities all over the world. So it's worth understanding why we do actually have this default to transactional behaviours. And there are multiple reasons, and I don't have time to go through them all now, but I'll pick 3 as an illustration. And these are what I'd call the systemic barriers to collaboration. They are barriers that sit outside of the direct ownership and responsibility of a project team. They just sit there and they largely invisibly having quite a significant influence on how we're going to interact. It's a really fundamental one, which is that human beings were actually wired to be tribal. So whilst our DNA means that we are, as humans, we're wired to connect and to collaborate and cooperate with other people, our preference is to do it in small groups rather than big groups. Now, we can work very well in big groups, but when things go wrong, the instinct is always to revert to the safety of our tribe. And so when we start to see the sort of short-term transactional behaviours that emerge in construction, if there's no other mechanism in place that diverts that direction of travel, then that's what we do. Another example of a systemic challenge is the way we organise projects. So if one looks at a typical project charter, you'll see that it's in 2 dimensions and organises people into vertical silos. It was really interesting looking at Jenny's slides to see the difference between the way that the project manager or project director might look at a project team and how information connects and flows up and down through a project, and looking at the reality of the actually construction, particularly large projects, work as networks. And then, as Sue mentioned, you know, our procurement systems, rather than actually looking to build on relationships, are actually designed almost to discourage procurement that acknowledges that there may have been a prior working relationship. So there are all kinds of other potential systemic barriers that might be specific to the context of a project. But what I wanted to get through here is that, in many ways, we're not waiting for an output and a sort of sudden emergence of rational and logical thinking that suddenly means everybody recognizes, oh yeah, what we need to do is be collaborative because everything will be fine. What we have instead is a default which moves the other way. Now, when I do face-to-face lectures, what I will quite often do is ask the audience, particularly if it's from a construction background, to think about the last 5 projects that they were involved in and just go through that checklist. How many of those features were developed over the course of the project? And what I would typically get a response rate is around about 1 in 5. But it's never a perfect answer, and people are always going, well, it's a little bit of that and a little bit of this. But on average, 1 in 5 could be described as a collaborative project. 3 out of the 5, not so good. Usually 1 out of the 5, absolutely not, complete disaster. And then some groups actually have had situations where it's been 4 out of the 5 have been disastrous. But as a rule, it's not a scientific measure, not one that I would ever quote in a paper, but on average, 20% or less of projects, you're going to find these desirable characteristics there, even though that's what we all aspire to. So why does that happen? And what I've noticed is something that I've called the collaboration fallacy. It builds on an idea or a concept that was recognized by 2 behavioral economists, Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky, back in the 1970s, where they came up with what they observed was the planning fallacy. And the planning fallacy is a common cognitive error that human beings make. We are really bad at estimating the time and the resources that a task or a project will take. We're nearly always over-optimistic. So how does that connect to the collaboration fallacy? Well, what I've found when talking to project managers and other project professionals, and I say, okay, so you're about to start a project, what are the things that you're concerned about? They will almost never talk about how are we going to work effectively as a team. They will immediately focus on the technical challenges, the commercial challenges, and yet, so when I say, well, what about the behavioral challenges? The view is, no, it'll be fine. It'll be fine. On this project, all people need to do is to behave sensibly and rationally, and we're all project professionals. We shouldn't have to worry about behaviors. And yet what I'm saying is, well, all the odds are stacked against you, so why aren't you worried about it? Now, while I've spent a lot of my time over the last 7 years is collecting stories from different parts of the industry, whether it's contractors, clients, project managers, designers, other construction consultants. And what I've been interested in is trying to find out not so much projects that went wrong, but projects that went well. Because, as I've said, probably on the 80-20 rule, 80% of the projects one typically encounters go wrong. What is it about the 20% that go right? What are the patterns? What's the information that comes out? So what I've learned from my research is, number one, that every project team needs to start with their eyes wide open. If you don't take steps to get the collaborative and social aspects of your team into order, then you're going to have problems. So don't fall for the collaboration fallacy and assume that everything will start fine. Second observation is that if one looks at every decision that's made around a construction project, there are 3 components to it. There's a technical component, and that's what we're paid to do. That's the thing. We have our knowledge and experience, and as Paul talked about, these are the things, the competencies and capabilities that we bring into a project. But of course, every decision has some form of, or virtually every decision has some form of commercial implication. And the more difficult the decision, usually the more expensive it's likely to be. And so clients and indeed project teams devote almost 95% or more of their energies and efforts thinking about the technical and commercial elements of a project. And yet, for the time being at least, it's people who actually have to implement the decisions. There's people who actually deliver projects. And so what I've shown here is these three elements as intertwined rings. And the point is they can't be separated. And so whilst I've come across projects where the decision is made, oh yeah, well, we need to do a bit of team building to start off with, and we need to get a team charter sorted out, and we'll do a number of these other things that have been identified as good practice. But they're then allowed to drift to the periphery of the project, because what technical people are particularly interested in is technical problems, technical solutions. And we allow this social component to drift too far. As Jenny identified, and indeed Paul identified, projects shouldn't be seen as, I mean, we tend to use this word, the team, to cover everybody, every individual who happens to be involved in a project at a particular moment in time. But projects, particularly large complex projects, need to be seen in a different way. They need to be thought of as networks, and they need to be thought of as networks that connect with each other, so that the role of the leadership, and part of the role of the project leadership, is to smooth the interfaces so that the interfaces between teams are collaborative. The other thing that, and it's a word that's come up a few times this evening, is about values. Values fundamentally drive behaviours, and every project becomes an organisation in itself. It's a temporary organisation. It exists to deliver the project, but it's nevertheless, it is an organisation, and each organisation will develop its own culture. Now, culture is a function of what the leaders value. So that you can look at any organisation, and once you've actually identified what the values are, you can link them directly back to those things that the senior people in the organisation actually believe are important. Now, I've been involved in too many projects over in recent years to see these ideas of these are our core values. So there are teamwork and around respect, integrity, focus. These are it's about goals. It's about equality and diversity. And these may well be good things to say, but actually, for them to actually have an impact on the project, then they actually have to be believed by the leaders. Now, all too often in our industry, what we tend to see is what leaders really are interested in are those core, the words that are sitting above here that pretty much exclude the human being and the human element. It's all about delivery of the project and the components that go into it. And now I'm not saying for a minute that cost, contract and finance and all of those elements, so these words here are not important. They're fundamentally important to getting the project delivered. But what happens, as we all know, is that when that is the sole focus, and that sole focus really implements and comes across in terms of the values of the project, then the people element starts to dissipate, and we end up with those dysfunctional behaviours that we identified early. So I have limited time to talk about this, but what I've concluded is that we work in an industry, and much as there's a quite substantial part of the industry yearns for some kind of change and talks about construction as an industry, what I found is it's such a vast series of enterprises that what we really, if I want to try and promote change, I would look at it as trying to implement change, not at an industry level, but at a project level. And if I'm trying to implement change, I've got to try and appeal to a variety of interests. And some of those interests are around could be around people, could be around process, could be around delivery and performance. So what I've pulled together is a model that actually starts to look at and talk about projects in terms of their performance curve. And what I'm trying to do here is to connect these three elements, the social, the technical, and the commercial, into a team, or let's say a program team development model that focuses, first of all, on what needs to go on in mobilization, through to acclimatization, and then ultimately moving into delivery mode. Now, what the model observes, and this is based on observations of fairly detailed review of a number of major either infrastructure projects or large commercial schemes. But I think that it also applies to less grand projects, in that as soon as you've got more than 50, 60 people together, you've moved from being a small team into a big team. Or let's say a large enterprise that's become a team of teams. So what the model looks at in terms, it says, well, okay, a project team comes together and their performance in terms of their output starts to develop at a steady rate. But what happens if one follows the blue line is that performance tails off because the investment just hasn't been made in the relationships and in the ways of working that mean that when problems occur, that the teams work together, or the individuals work together, the sub-teams work together to find a solution. And so what one sees in the business as usual curve is that a point arises at a certain stage in the project where the lack of cooperation and collaboration starts to mean that performance diminishes. Communication starts to stretch out, problems are escalated rather than solved, and we head into the downward spiral, which ultimately ends in usually on the steps of the courthouse. The alternative, which I'm advocating, and I think actually one way or another we're all advocating, is that we need to pay attention in the early stages to a number of factors. And so my starting point in terms of mobilization of an effective project is one must pay attention to leadership capacity and look at alternative leadership models, look at what the leadership actually believe is going to be the most effective way, so that they then are able to establish a genuine high performance culture that's based on a collection of values that are actually actionable, that you can do something with, that can be measured and can be used to assemble the rest of the team. One then sets up the team through a process of alignment, and then as the team is starting to progress, works hard to get the team into a set of processes so that they start to solve problems together, which they call accelerated learning. And what I've seen when this takes place is one gets a phenomenal uplift in terms of output and delivery, but to sustain it, one then has got to maintain it. So one's got to maintain engagement. And just because one's at a high level of delivery doesn't mean that the problems go away, and that one's also got to build resilience into the team. Now, I'm just conscious of time, so I'm going to skip or run through this slide very quickly. But essentially, there are 8 levels or eight elements that have been found to be essential components of a team setup. Now, that team setup I'm talking about is the group of between 9 to 12 people that typically might make up a sub-team, might be less than that, rarely more. And my observation is that when any team that goes through this process has a much greater chance of working as a successful group. But what we want in a large project is for all of the teams to have gone through the same process, so that when they're interacting with each other, they're working within a common framework. So just flipping through those elements, they're reasonably straightforward. But you can look at them again when you have a look at the slides. What I wanted to introduce was just a concept that I've not seen talked about very much before. And it's about the specialist expertise that comes. So if one thinks about the amount of time that's paid to lawyers, to accountants, to cost consultants, to engineers, to designers, to get the technical and commercial areas right, why do we just assume that the social component is going to be that straightforward when, of course, we've all recognized, even just from this evening's discussions, that there's a missing component here? And so what I've seen, and indeed been involved in myself, is the emergence of a new profession in some ways, which is the team coach. The people who are largely interested in this come out of the world of coaching, executive coaching, but there's an increasing recognition that one-to-one executive coaching has a role, but it tends to just solve the problem of the individual executive, whereas to have an impact, a coach is probably going to be far more effective if they're able to help a whole team focus on their objectives and help them get where they need to be. So, as I've said here, there's a role for a specialist in human dynamics, team dynamics, to actually help individual teams at their inception ensure the right behavioural norms are embedded, but also then as the project progresses, then actually starting to smooth the interfaces between sub-teams and managing conflict. So whatever the role, it's important to gain, I think, is whether you call them a team coach, whether they're just a specialist, you might call them a facilitator, change expert, whatever the box or title one uses, actually thinking about getting some of the specialist resource engaged in your team is going to actually, where I've seen it in play, it's had a very significant benefit. Teams who often started off somewhat skeptical and cynical about having yet another consultant on the team, then found in hindsight that when that individual left the team, it was actually to the detriment of the project. So what are my conclusions? Human beings working in big teams can achieve amazing results, but actually more often than not, we tend to limit our collective abilities. But with good leadership, focus on building a collaborative culture, we can get teams to adopt the right behavioural norms. The problem is that managing behaviour isn't yet seen as a core skill, but well, it's my mission in life to get project managers to start to think and see and adopt a different mindset, and to actually understand the value of that social intelligence component when they put it into a project. But in the short term, adding a specialist expertise in team behaviours is going to increase the chances of a set of positive outcomes. Now, in 20 minutes, I've not had a great deal of time to really explore many of the ideas in detail. I'm usually a little bit loath to do some self-promotion, but it just happens tomorrow morning, the third book I've written on big teams is actually published. And if you buy a copy tomorrow, if you want a Kindle copy, you can actually get a Kindle copy for 99p, something that the publisher set up in order to try and get my Amazon rankings higher up the listing. Anyway, thank you very much for listening. So I'll now pass you to go back to Craig.
Thanks for that, Tony. I think we've now got a few questions. To share, Andy, have we?
Yeah, good evening, everyone. Thanks to our speakers, really good stuff, some good content covered. We haven't got many questions, so whilst I will read out the ones that are in the question panel and some of the answers. While I'm doing that, if you do have any burning questions, please do log them in the question window, and we'll catch those as we go. So Jim asked, firstly, right at the start, will the presentations be shared or available? Yes, absolutely they will. If you go onto the UK BIM Alliance website, under the engagement menu, you'll see communities, and then in communities, you'll see East. And if you go on there in about a week or so, those slide decks will be available in PDF. We also had a question from Jack regarding actually making this recording available. Exactly the same thing, actually, albeit it will sit on the, we do have a YouTube channel. So if you search UK BIM Alliance on YouTube, or there is a link under resources, I think, on the website that will take you there as well. So give us about a week or so and Pam will have that up there for you. We also then had a question regarding, I think one of our speakers earlier on touched on procurement at lowest cost, lowest price, which we often see. And one of the questions from Jim was, local authorities usually go for the lowest price. How can we change this? This is a difficult one, albeit there is a working group at the moment. Funny enough that I sit on, so I can answer that myself. It's led by Terry Stocks of CDBB, with a number of individuals from some of the local authorities, and a mixture of those local authorities that are embracing digital BIM and value-led procurement, and those that are still, don't really get it. So there's been some really good discussions and topics. That's Terry's putting together, want of a better word, a white paper to put that back to CDBB to hopefully draw some funding for that to then hopefully go out to the local authorities and for a working group to start developing some tools and resources, and to hopefully, and part of that will be encouraging procurement via life cycle as opposed to capital cost. That's that one. We haven't actually got any specific questions for any of our speakers tonight. However, I will ask one, and actually thank you, Sue, it's actually Sue's question. I'll field that to Tony if I can. Are you aware are there any team coaches working on projects in the UK at the moment, Tony, that you know
of? Yes, yeah. So I'm one. There are different organisations, and initially I've been hesitant to talk about team coaching because not many people are aware of it. But there are now so many people taking up training specifically to qualify as a team coach that there's going to be plenty around, and they're going to be talking in the market. But too much team coaching training education is focused on executive teams or standing teams in existing organizations, where I look at project teams and see that the project teams are the ones who could really make great use of having that external expertise. So there are a number of I know about 10 organizations that provide, whether they call it behavioral support, whether they call it collaboration support, there are different names to it, but actually the skills they're applying and the interventions they're making are all sit under the heading of team coaching.
Fantastic, thanks Tony. We have another question coming from Rayhana actually whilst Tony was talking there, which is really good. So, and I'm going to put this open to our speakers that are still on the call. Actually, I don't think it's anyone specifically. So, how can we define collaboration among different actors on the project and in the supply chain? How can we ask people to collaborate when they have different values? Probably, I'd imagine, is that one. Well, does anyone want to dive in and ask that, Pam, if we can unmute our...
Well, I'll pick the values point first of all. One of the key elements to success of a project in terms of project selection is you don't have to, as organizations, you don't have to have the same values, but you do have to have aligned values, because if the values aren't aligned, then it's going to end in tears, because essentially you can look at some values which are very commercially oriented and are focused on the short term. There are some values in organizations, particularly client organizations, which are about control and the search for stability, whereas actually projects in the modern world often have such a high degree of complexity, not necessarily because of the technical nature of the project, but just the project environment they're working in, where there is uncertain funding, there are uncertain political situations, etc., etc. If we look at perhaps the largest current example will be something like High Speed 2, which is a project that in itself, the railway has some technical challenges, but they're not challenges that haven't been worked out before. But it's an immensely complex project just because of the number of people who want to have a say in it. So finding values, finding a set of aligned values in your contractors, in your design team, and aligning them with the client body actually requires some work, because people have got to understand if their values aren't aligned, then where are they likely to lead to a clash? And again, it's a classic team coaching support exercise.
Sure. Thank you,
Yeah,
Tony.
could I add to that as well, please? I think I absolutely agree with what was said just then, but when we're looking at small teams as well, it's kind of the number of projects that I observed where in that inception meeting, values weren't even explicitly discussed, so that we talk about, when we all come together as a team, we talk about the nuts and bolts of the project, we talk about contracts, we talk about deadlines, milestones, all those kind of hard-edged things. And actually, we need to kind of remember to include that on the agenda in those meetings, and bear in mind the social dynamics throughout the life of a team as well, that when you're collaborating, when you meet for the first time, you come together for the first time, everyone's on their best behavior and everyone's holding back. So you really don't get to really understand the values of the team members that well. So throughout the life of the project, it's really important to explicitly go back and put those on the agenda, and as the kind of team moves through its sort of phases of development.
Yeah, can I just add to that as well? One of the things that I saw quite a lot when I was working in industry in the 1990s, and we were working on partnering projects, was at the outset, project teams would often come together and sign a project charter, and that would summarize many of the values that were important across the team and which the client expected the team to adhere to as far as possible within the context of a commercial project team. Bringing that more up to date, the constructive collaboration initiative, which I mentioned, I've been in sessions, and the structure of the analysis is that the project team have to return back and score their project team and how well they're adhering to the characteristics of a strongly collaborative project, and many of those characteristics are actually values that the project team adhere to, seek to adhere to, and it means that they're constantly kept under review, and there is a constant effort to ascertain how well the team is working in alignment with those values.
Brilliant, thanks, Paul. Just close to the time, guys. We've got a hard stop at 7:30. One more very quick one for Jenny. This is from Pandora online. The 3 cases that you undertook, was there a difference in the values and types of projects? And do you think it matters in terms of, I think, project values?
That's a really good question. I think whether there were. Sorry?
In 1 minute, if you can answer that, that would be fantastic.
Okay, then fine. I think yes, there were differences, but what remains constant is the fact that the human condition and the human being and the way we operate psychologically remains constant. So actually, what goes on within that bucket of that we call the project is it kind of doesn't matter. Human behaviour is always the same.
Fantastic. Thank you. Okay, we'll wrap up questions there. If I can hand back to Craig, and he'll just wrap up the event. Brilliant.
Great. Thank you, everyone. To finish off, I'd like to give thanks to our 4 presenters, Sue, Jenny, Paul and Tony. Thank you. They were all brilliant, informative presentations. Thank you very much. To our audience, thank you for attending this event. I hope you enjoyed the content as much as we did. In this time of uncertainty, it's more important than ever to look after each other and stay safe. Thank you very much.